No one could enter the cursed tower, but the human janitor was already living there. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The obsidian spire rose from the dead center of the Galactic Preservation District, a monument to a civilization that had died, screaming 3,000 years ago. Its black surface absorbed light like a hungry void, and every species in the known galaxy gave it a wide berth. Every species except one, apparently, because Nathan Brooks had been living there for the past 6 months, and he was getting really tired of people acting surprised about it. The first time the Preservation Council discovered Nathan's residence, it was because he filed a maintenance request for a broken water recirculator. The message arrived at the council headquarters on the station orbiting the tower's planet, and it caused what witnesses later described as unprecedented bureaucratic panic. Councillor Varick, a towering Calgarian with iridescent scales that shifted through colors based on emotional state, stared at the request form with scales flickering between confused purple and alarmed orange. The form read, "Water recirculator in residential unit 47. Making weird grinding noise. Sounds like it's trying to achieve sentience. Please advise or send replacement parts. Thanks, Nathan Brooks, Custodial Services." Varick's assistant, a methodical Talvorian named Minda with 4 arms and compound eyes that could process visual data at remarkable speeds, leaned over to read the form. All 4 of her hands stopped moving at once, her usual sign of extreme shock. "Sir, this request appears to originate from inside the obsidian spire," Minda said carefully. "That's impossible," Varick replied, scales now a sickly green. "Nothing living can survive in the spire. The psychic emanations alone would drive any sentient being to madness within hours. We've lost 3 research teams just attempting to breach the entrance field. Nevertheless, the signature is authentic and recent, 20 minutes ago to be precise." Varick stood abruptly, his 7-foot frame towering over the desk. "Assemble a response team. Full protective gear. If someone is actually inside that cursed structure, they're either dead, dying, or about to provide us with the most significant scientific breakthrough in preservation council history." 6 hours later, a heavily shielded transport touched down at the base of the obsidian spire. The response team consisted of 12 members from various species, all equipped with the most advanced psychic shielding technology available. They had enough protective gear to explore a supernova, and they were sweating with fear before they even left the transport. The tower's entrance was a massive archway that seemed to lead directly into darkness. The air around it shimmered with barely contained energy, and several team members reported immediate headaches despite their shielding. According to all previous research, stepping through that archway would result in immediate psychological breakdown, followed by physical decay, and finally a disturbing tendency for the victim's remains to be absorbed into the tower structure itself. Counselor Varick stood at the front of the group, his scales a determined silver. He raised one clawed hand to activate his communicator. "This is Preservation Council Emergency Response Team to any survivors within the obsidian spire. We have received your distress signal. Please respond." For a long moment there was only the howling wind that seemed to perpetually circle the tower's base, then crackling through the communicator. With surprising clarity came a human voice. "Oh hey, you guys got my maintenance request. That was fast. Usually takes you folks weeks too." Respond, "Hang on, I'll come down and let you in. The front entrance is kind of sticky." The team members looked at each other in confusion. The voice sounded remarkably casual, almost cheerful. There was background noise that sounded suspiciously like music. 2 minutes later, the darkness within the archway shifted and a figure emerged. The entire response team took an involuntary step backward. The human was utterly ordinary. He wore a faded blue jumpsuit with custodial services patches on the shoulders, scuffed work boots, and a tool belt that jangled with various implements. He was average height for a human, maybe early 30s, with short brown hair and an easy smile. He was wiping his hands on a rag that might have once been white but was now a dubious gray. "Nathan Brooks," he said, extending a hand toward Varys, who stared at it like it might explode. "Sorry about the mess. I was reorganizing the Eastern Archive. When you panned, you guys want to come in? Fair warning, the elevator's out on floors 20 through 35, so we'll have to take the stairs if you want to see those levels." Minda was the first to find her voice. "You're alive." Nathan looked down at himself, then back at her with a grin. "Last time I checked, yeah, why wouldn't I be? Because you're inside the obsidian spire." Varric managed his scales, cycling through colors so rapidly they were almost strobing. "Most psychically toxic structure in the known galaxy. The emanations alone should have reduced your mind to fragments within the first hour." Nathan's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. "Oh, is that what everyone's worried about? The psychic stuff?" He laughed, a sound so normal and human that it seemed to make the ancient stones around them shudder slightly. "Yeah, I noticed that when I first moved in. It was giving me some pretty intense headaches, but I figured out if you just kind of ignore it, it goes away. Like tinnitus, your brain just filters it out after a while." The entire response team stared at him in silence. Several members were running diagnostic scans on their equipment, certain that their translation matrices must be malfunctioning. "You just ignored it," Varric repeated slowly. "Well, yeah. I mean, at first I thought maybe the building was haunted or something, but then I realized it was probably just some kind of leftover security system from whoever built this place. Old buildings are always weird like that. You should see some of the stuff I dealt with back on Earth. Had a job in a converted factory once where the whole North Wing would just randomly smell like vanilla for no reason. Never figured that one out." Nathan patted the dark wall beside him with casual affection. "This old girl's got character, I'll give her that, but she's solid, good bones." Minda's compound eyes were processing data faster than her brain could keep up. "You've been living here for how long?" "About 6 months, I think. Lost track a bit. Time gets weird when you don't have to commute." Nathan gestured toward the archway. "Look, do you guys want to come in and check out the water recirculator, or are we going to stand out here all day? It's going to rain in about an hour, and trust me, you don't want to be outside when that happens. The tower does something weird to the weather patterns." Very made a decision that would later be described as either incredibly brave or spectacularly foolish. "Yes, show us." Nathan's face lit up. "Awesome, okay. Follow me and watch your step. Some of the floor plates in the entrance hall are a bit loose. I've been meaning to fix those, but I've been focused on the upper levels. You would not believe the dust situation up there. 3,000 years of accumulated grime is no joke. He turned and walked casually back through the archway into the darkness that had defeated every previous expedition. After a moment of hesitation, Varric followed. The rest of the team came after, bunched together like frightened children. The moment they crossed the threshold, every psychic alarm in their protective suits began screaming. Emanations hit them like a physical force, a howling void of rage and despair, and something older and hungrier than language could describe. 3 team members immediately collapsed. 2 more began screaming. Varric felt his mind begin to fragment, his carefully maintained sense of self shredding like paper in a hurricane, and then he heard Nathan's voice, calm and slightly annoyed. All right, you guys have all that protective gear on. That's actually making it worse. The tower doesn't like shields and barriers. It interprets them as threats. You're basically telling it you're here to fight. Through vision that was rapidly tunneling into darkness, Varric saw Nathan walk back over to him. The human reached out and with surprising gentleness began deactivating Varric's psychic shielding. Wait, don't, Varric tried to say, but his voice wouldn't work properly. Trust me, Nathan said. I know it seems backward, but you've got to let the defenses down. The tower needs to know you're not a threat. The psychic shielding powered off. Varric braced himself for the full force of the spire's malevolence to crash into his unprotected mind. Instead, the howling void pulled back. It didn't disappear. Exactly. It was more like it stepped back to observe a massive predator, deciding this particular prey wasn't worth the effort. There you go, Nathan said, studying Varric as the Kalian's legs threatened to give out. Just breathe. Let it wash over you. Don't fight it. Varric did as instructed, mainly because he was too shocked to do anything else. The psychic pressure was still there, but it was no longer actively trying to destroy him. It was like standing in a room with a barely contained explosion, knowing it could go off at any moment, but trusting that it wouldn't. Nathan moved through the team, deactivating protective systems and offering reassurances. There you go. That's better. You guys okay? Nobody's bleeding from the eyes or anything. That's a good sign. First time I came in here, I thought my head was going to pop like a balloon, but you get used to it. Within 5 minutes, the entire team was standing inside the Obsidian Spire's entrance hall, unshielded and alive. They looked around in wonder and terror. The interior was vast. The entrance hall alone could have housed a small starship, with walls that rose into darkness and a floor made of that same light-absorbing black material. But what caught everyone's attention were the distinctly human touches scattered throughout. There was a portable music player in one corner, currently playing something with a cheerful acoustic guitar. A coffee maker sat on what might have once been a ceremonial altar with a handwritten sign that said, "Please wash your mug." Several cleaning carts were parked along one wall, organized with the precision of someone who took their custodial duties seriously. And in the center of the hall, incongruous and impossible, was a small garden, actual plants growing in soil that Nathan had apparently brought in himself, thriving under portable grow lights. I got tired Of eating ration bars, Nathan explained. When he saw them staring, turns out the tower's got this whole underground water system completely pure too. Once I tapped into that, I figured I might as well grow some vegetables. The tomatoes are doing great. Minda walked slowly toward the garden, her forearms hanging limply at her sides. This is impossible. I mean, it's just basic hydroponics. Nathan said modestly. I watched some tutorials on the local net. It's not that hard once you get the pH balance right. Not the garden, Minda said, her voice strained. All of this you living here surviving the tower should have killed you. Nathan looked around at the dark walls, his expression thoughtful. You know, everyone keeps saying that, but I think maybe you're all going about it wrong. This place isn't evil or cursed or whatever. It's just old and lonely and pissed off that nobody visits anymore. I mean, think about it. You guys all show up with weapons and shields and scan it like it's a threat. How would you feel if someone did that to your home? This is not a home, Varric said, his scales a pale, uncertain blue. This is a tomb, a monument to the Voidorn, a species that mastered psychic warfare so thoroughly they nearly destroyed the entire sector before they turned their weapons on themselves in a final orgy of madness. Yeah, I read about that in the historical database, Nathan said, nodding. Pretty messed up. But that was 3,000 years ago. Voidborn are gone. This is just their building now, and somebody's got to take care of it. He started walking deeper into the tower, clearly expecting them to follow. After exchanging glances, they did. Nathan gave them a tour that would have been mundane if it weren't taking place in the most feared structure in the galaxy. He showed them the maintenance sublevels where he'd repaired several failing power systems. He demonstrated the environmental controls he'd figured out by trial and error. He pointed out structural damage he was slowly fixing with materials he'd requisitioned from the station. The hard part is matching materials, Nathan explained as they climbed a massive spiral staircase. The Voidborn used construction techniques we don't really understand anymore, but I found you can usually substitute with standard door steel if you brace it properly. It's not pretty, but it holds. They reached the residential level where Nathan had been living. His quarters were a series of connected rooms that the Voidorn had probably used for something ritualistic and terrifying. Nathan had turned them into a surprisingly cozy apartment. There was a bed, a small kitchen area, desk with a computer, and walls covered in hand-drawn charts and notes. This is my living space, Nathan said, sounding slightly embarrassed. I know it's kind of a mess. I've been working on cataloging the tower systems, and I haven't had time to clean up. Charts on the walls were intricate maps of the tower's layout, power conduits, water systems, and what appeared to be the psychic emanation patterns. Nathan had been studying the building, learning it, understanding it in a way that no research team had ever managed. You map the psychic fields, Minda said, moving closer to examine the charts. How Nathan shrugged, just paid attention mostly. They follow a pattern. See, it's strongest here in the central core, and it pulses in these kind of wave cycles. Once you figure out the timing, you can move through the tower without hitting the really bad spots. And what is the central core? Varric asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Nathan's expression became more serious. I haven't been there yet. It's up on level 92. Whatever's generating the psychic field is coming from there. I figured I'd work my way up slowly, get the tower used to me being here, but yeah, eventually I want to see what's at the heart of this place. The team spent 3 hours in the tower documenting everything with increasingly frantic energy. Nathan showed them the archives, vast libraries of Voidorn knowledge that previous expeditions had never reached. He demonstrated the still functional transit systems. He even made them coffee from his precious supply served in mismatched mugs he brought from the station. Finally, Varric had to ask the question that was consuming him. Why are you here, Nathan Brooks? Of all the places in the galaxy you could be, why choose to live in the Obsidian Spire? Nathan was quiet for a moment, looking around at the dark walls with something that might have been affection. I was working as a janitor on the station. Pretty boring job, honestly, cleaning the same corridors, fixing the same broken dispensers. Then I heard about this place. Everyone talked about how dangerous it was, how nobody could survive here, and I thought, well, it's probably just dirty and in need of basic maintenance, right? Old buildings always get a reputation when they're not properly cared for. He paused, running a hand along the black wall, so I came down to take a look. Figured I'd just check it out, see if maybe the problem was something simple like a gas leak or faulty wiring. And when I got here, I felt it, the psychic pressure, and it was bad. Yeah, real bad. But underneath that, I felt something else. The tower was in pain. It had been alone for 3,000 years, slowly falling apart with nobody to help it, nobody even willing to try. Nathan looked at Very with clear, honest eyes. I'm a janitor. It's not a glamorous job, but it's important. Buildings need care. They need someone to notice when things break, to fix the small problems before they become big ones. And this building has been screaming for help for 3 millennia. But everyone's been too scared to listen. So you moved in, Minda said softly. So I moved in. Figured the worst that could happen is I'd die. And honestly, my life on the station wasn't that great anyway, but I didn't die. And once I started fixing things, started taking care of the place, the psychic pressure eased up. The tower recognized that I was trying to help, and now this is home. Very felt something shift in his understanding of the universe. He had spent decades studying the Obsidian Spire from a safe distance, trying to understand it through instruments and theory. This human had simply walked in with a mop and a toolbox and decided to help. The water recirculator, Varric said suddenly. You actually need it fixed. Nathan grinned. Yeah, it's really annoying. Keeps me up at night with that grinding noise. You think you could send someone down with the parts, or I can come pick them up if that's easier. I need to grab more coffee from the station anyway. That evening, after the response team had left with enough documentation to keep xenorchaeologists busy for years, Nathan stood at one of the tower's high windows and looked out at the darkening sky. The Obsidian Spire hummed around him, its psychic presence of familiar pressure in the back of his mind. He'd told the council the truth, but not all of it. Yes, the tower had been lonely and in pain. Yes, it had needed someone to care for it, but there was more to it than that. Nathan had felt from the very first moment he'd crossed the threshold that the tower had been waiting, not for anyone, for him specifically. The Voidborn had built this place with purposes that went beyond mere Construction, they'd woven something into its very structure, something that had survived their extinction. The tower needed a caretaker, not a researcher or a warrior or a psychic master. It needed someone humble enough to see value in simple maintenance, someone stubborn enough to ignore 3,000 years of accumulated fear, and someone compassionate enough to hear a building's pain and respond to it. Nathan had been that person, and in the 6 months since he'd moved in, he'd felt the towers slowly wake up around him. Systems that had been dormant for millennia were beginning to activate. Sealed sections were opening their doors, and the psychic emanations, the terrible weapon the void had created, were slowly transforming into something else, something not hostile, not yet friendly perhaps, but no longer actively malevolent. He placed his hand on the dark wall, feeling the faint vibration that ran through the structure. "We're going to figure you out," he said quietly. "You and me, no rush, we've got time." The tower's response was subtle, a slight warmth spreading through the wall under his palm. Not words exactly. The Voidborn hadn't built this place to communicate through language, but Nathan understood the sentiment well enough. Welcome home. The news of Nathan's residence in the Obsidian Spire spread through the galactic community with the speed and intensity of a supernova. Within days, it was the top story on every major news network. Scientists demanded immediate access to study this human who could survive the unsurvivable. Military strategists wanted to know if Nathan possessed some kind of unique defensive capability. Psychics from a dozen species requested meetings, certain that he must have latent abilities he wasn't aware of. Nathan's response to all of it was to file another maintenance request, this time for a broken door seal on level 38. The Preservation Council found itself in an unprecedented situation. They couldn't order Nathan to leave because technically he'd been living there unchallenged for months. The Obsidian Spire was in neutral territory, designated as a galactic heritage site, but not owned by any specific government. More importantly, forcing Nathan out would require entering the tower in force, and after the response team's experience, nobody was eager to try that. Instead, Counselor Varickman, a decision that would change everything. He offered Nathan an official position. The meeting took place in Nathan's quarters because Nathan refused to leave the tower for extended periods, he said. The building got anxious when he was gone too long. Several counselors found this statement deeply disturbing, but by this point they were willing to accept that Nathan knew the tower better than anyone. Varric sat in a chair that Nathan had found in one of the storage levels and refurbished for other counselors, attended via hologram, unwilling to enter the spire in person, prepared to offer you the position of official custodian and caretaker of the Obsidian Spire. Varick said, scales a diplomatic green. The salary would be substantial, and we would provide whatever resources you need for maintenance and restoration. Nathan looked up from the coffee he was brewing. Does this mean you'll actually send someone to fix the water recirculator? We'll send an entire engineering team if necessary, and I can request materials and equipment without going through 6 levels of bureaucracy. You'll have direct requisition authority. Nathan considered this while pouring coffee into 2 cups. He offered one to Varick, who accepted it with one of his smaller manipulator claws. What's The catch, no catch, we simply want to formalize an arrangement that already exists. You're the only being in the galaxy who can safely maintain this structure. It makes sense to make that official, and you want access. Nathan said it wasn't a question. Varric's scales flickered with embarrassment at being so easily read. The obsidian spire contains void-born knowledge that could advance our understanding of psychic phenomena by centuries. If you could facilitate research teams. No, Nathan said simply. The holographic counselors stirred with surprise. Varric leaned forward. I'm sorry, no research teams. Not yet. The tower isn't ready for that. It barely tolerates me, and I've been working my ass off to build trust with it. You send in a bunch of scientists poking around trying to take things apart to study them, and we'll be back to square one. Except this time the tower might decide to do something more active about intruders. Are you saying the tower is sentient? One of the holographic counselors asked, a nervous Tivorian with too many eyes. Nathan shrugged. I'm saying it's aware. I don't know if that's the same thing as sentient, but it knows when people are here, and it knows what their intentions are. You come in with respect, with the intention to help and preserve. It'll tolerate you. You come in to exploit or damage or take, and it'll crush you. He sipped his coffee completely calm. I'll accept the position and the resources. I'll even start detailed documentation that your researchers can study, but nobody enters this tower without my permission, and nobody takes anything out without my approval. Those are my terms. The counselors conferred in whispers and private channels. Finally, Varric nodded. Agreed. You'll have full authority over access to the spire. Great, Nathan said, smiling. In that case, I should probably tell you about the things I've found in the Eastern Archive. You're going to want to sit down for this. Over the next few weeks, Nathan began sending reports to the council that revolutionized their understanding of the Voidorn civilization. The information wasn't tactical or military, which disappointed some factions. Instead, it was mundane, everyday details about Voidorn life. Their art, their literature, their philosophy. Nathan had found personal journals, family records, children's toys. He was reconstructing not the terrifying psychic warriors that had nearly destroyed the sector, but the ordinary people who had lived and loved and died in this place. The Void-born hadn't been monsters. They'd been people who had made terrible choices with their abilities, who had weaponized their own minds until they destroyed themselves. The obsidian spire had been built as a sanctuary, a place meant to preserve their culture and knowledge for whatever came after. The psychic defenses weren't meant to kill, they were meant to test, to ensure that only someone truly willing to understand, truly willing to help rather than exploit could access what lay within. For 3,000 years, everyone who approached the spire had come with fear, with weapons, with the intention to conquer or study or control. The tower had responded accordingly. Nathan had arrived with a mop and a genuine desire to help, and the tower had opened its doors. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday, approximately 8 months after Nathan had first moved in. He'd been working his way up the tower level by level, cataloging and repairing as he went. He'd finally reached level 92, where the psychic emanations originated. Nathan stood before a massive sealed door, his hand resting on the dark surface. He could feel the power behind it, a presence so vast and old that it made the rest of the tower's defenses feel like whispers. This was the heart they core, whatever the Voidborn had left behind. It was here. Okay, Nathan said quietly, I think we're ready for this. You and me, let's see what you've been protecting all this time. The door had no visible controls, no mechanical locks. It responded to intention, to worthiness. Nathan pressed his palm flat against it and pushed, not with physical force but with the same openness and respect he'd shown the tower from the beginning. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a long held breath being released, the door opened. The room beyond was circular and vast, with walls that seemed to extend into impossible dimensions. In the center floated a crystalline structure pulsing with light that hurt to look at directly. This was the source of the psychic field, the heart of the obsidian spire. Nathan walked toward it slowly, and as he did, he felt the presence regard him. It wasn't hostile. It was curious, and under that, desperately hopeful. The crystal was a repository. He realized the last legacy of the Voidborn people. They had known they were destroying themselves, that their weaponized psychic abilities had created a feedback loop that would lead to extinction. In their final days, they had built this place and created this guardian to protect their true legacy, not their weapons or their conquests, their souls. Every Voidborn who had died in the final madness had left an imprint here, a fragment of their consciousness preserved in crystalline matrix. Billions of minds sleeping and dreaming, waiting for someone who could understand what they had become and why they had failed. Nathan stood before the crystal and spoke, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. I see you, I understand, and I'm sorry nobody came sooner. The psychic presence that had defended the tower for 3 millennia reached out to touch Nathan's mind. It was gentle questioning. It wanted to know if he would help them, if he would stay, if he would give their memories and their mistakes meaning by preserving them and sharing them with those who came after. Yeah, Nathan said, yeah, I can do that. That's what I'm here for. The crystal pulsed once, bright enough to light the entire room, and then, like a burden finally shared, the psychic pressure throughout the entire tower released, not disappeared, but transformed. The obsidian spire had been a fortress, a warning, a test. Now it was a library, a memorial, a gift to the future. Nathan felt the chain ripple through the structure. Doors that had been sealed opened, systems that had been dormant activated. The tower was waking up fully for the first time in 3,000 years, and it was no longer alone. He pulled out his communicator and sent a message to Varric. It was short and to the point. Very Nathan figured out the central core. You're going to want to send some archivists. Bring comfortable shoes. This is going to take a while. The transformation of the obsidian spire became one of the defining events of the galactic era. With Nathan's permission and guidance carefully selected, researchers began entering the tower. They came in small groups, respectful and humble, and the spire accepted them. The knowledge contained within the Voidborn repository revolutionized understanding of psychic phenomena, yes, but more importantly, it provided a cautionary tale about the dangers of weaponizing consciousness itself. Nathan became something of a celebrity, though he hated it. He turned down interview requests and speaking engagements preferring to focus on his work. Tower still needed maintenance, after all. The fact that he was now maintaining a living monument to an extinct civilization while helping to catalog the preserved consciousness of billions didn't change the fundamentals of the job. There were still floors to clean, systems to repair, and a building that needed someone to care about it. The other species of the galaxy struggled to understand how a human janitor had succeeded where their greatest warriors and psychics had failed. They created theories about human neurological uniqueness, about Earth's particular evolutionary pressures, about hidden aspects of human consciousness. Nathan found most of these theories hilarious when pressed by a particularly persistent xenopsychologist about his ability to resist the spire's defenses. Nathan had shrugged and said, "I think maybe you guys were just overthinking it. Sometimes the solution to a problem isn't to fight harder or be smarter. Sometimes you just need to be kind." The xenopsychologist had written a paper about this statement that won several awards, interpreting it as a profound insight into human cognitive flexibility and emotional intelligence. Nathan, upon reading it, had commented that people really needed to stop taking his offhand remarks so seriously. 1 year after Nathan had first moved into the Obsidian Spire, the Preservation Council held a ceremony to officially dedicate the structure as the Voyorn Memorial Archive. Dignitaries from across the galaxy attended. There were speeches about the importance of preserving dangerous knowledge, about learning from the mistakes of the past, about the courage required to face fear with compassion. Nathan attended because Very had asked him to, and he liked Varric. He wore his cleanest jumpsuit and stood uncomfortably while people congratulated him on his historic achievement. He was relieved when the ceremony ended and he could return to the tower. That evening, he sat in his quarters with a cup of coffee, looking at the charts on his walls. He'd mapped 98 of the tower's 120 levels. There was still so much to explore, so much to understand. The Voidorn repository had shared memories and knowledge, but there were entire sections of the spire whose purposes remained mysterious. Nathan smiled. He had job security for life, apparently, not that he'd been planning to leave anyway. A gentle pulse of psychic energy rippled through the room, the tower's way of getting his attention. Nathan had learned to interpret these pulses over the months. This one felt curious, questioning. "Yeah, I'm okay," Nathan said aloud, just thinking about how weird my life has gotten. A year ago I was cleaning bathroom dispensers on the station. Now I'm the custodian of the most famous building in the galaxy and roommates with the collective consciousness of an extinct civilization. It's been quite the career change. Another pulse. This one feeling amused. Nathan had come to appreciate the tower's sense of humor. It was dry and subtle, but it was there. "You know what the funny thing is?" Nathan continued, standing and walking to the window. "Everyone acts like I did something incredible, like I'm some kind of hero, but I just did my job. I saw a building that needed help and I helped it. That's all." The tower's response was complex, layered with emotions that didn't translate easily into words. Gratitude, affection, respect, and something else. A sense that Nathan was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Nathan placed his hand on the dark wall, feeling the familiar warmth. Yeah, I think so too. Thanks for letting me stay. The years that followed established a new normal for the Obsidian Spire. It became a place of pilgrimage, of study, of reflection. Researchers came to learn from the Voiborn's mistakes. Psychics came to test themselves against the repositories. Challenges with Nathan's supervision. Artists came to be inspired by the alien beauty of the architecture. Nathan managed it all with the same straightforward competence he'd always had. He created a rotation schedule for researchers, established safety protocols, and maintained a strict policy about respecting the tower and the memories it contained. Anyone who came with disrespect or greed found themselves politely but firmly escorted out, usually with psychic pressure that gave them migraines for days. The tower had learned from Nathan. It no longer killed intruders, it just made them very uncomfortable until they left. One of Nathan's first challenges came 3 months after the tower opened to supervised research. A Vitoran military delegation arrived, led by General Krask, a being whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was known across several sectors. The Vitorans had lost an entire strike force to void weapons during the ancient wars, and Krask made no secret of his intention to study the tower's defenses. For military applications, Nathan met them at the entrance, his usual friendly demeanor noticeably cooler. General Krask, the council forwarded your request. I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline. Krask, who stood nearly 9 ft tall with armor plating that was both biological and technological, looked down at Nathan with barely concealed contempt. You have no authority to refuse a military research delegation. Actually, I do, Nathan said calmly. I'm the official custodian of the Obsidian Spire. That means I have final say on who enters and what they're allowed to study, and I'm not letting you in to figure out how to weaponize Voidorn technology. That's literally the exact mistake that destroyed their entire civilization. The general's armor plates shifted, a sign of agitation. You're a janitor, you clean floors, you don't make strategic decisions about galactic security. You're right, I am a janitor, and this building is under my care. The Voidborn created weapons that nearly destroyed the sector, and then those weapons turned inward and destroyed them. Their final act was to preserve their history so others could learn from their mistakes. I'm not going to dishonor that legacy by helping you repeat those mistakes. Crash took a threatening step forward behind Nathan. The Obsidian Spire's entrance shimmered, and the psychic pressure spiked dramatically. The general's entourage immediately began showing signs of distress. Krask himself staggered, his multiple eyes widening in shock. Nathan didn't move. The tower doesn't like threats, General. I'd suggest you step back. The pressure continued to build until Krask had no choice but to retreat. As soon as he moved away from Nathan, the pressure eased. The general stared at the human with a mixture of fear and fury. This isn't over, Crash growled. Yeah, it is, Nathan replied. Go home, General. There's nothing here for you. The delegation left, and Nathan filed a report with the council about the incident. When some council members suggested he'd been too harsh, Nathan's response was simple. The tower is a memorial, not an armory. Anyone who can't respect that doesn't get in. No exceptions. The council backed him up, recognizing that Nathan's relationship with the spire was the only thing keeping it from returning to its hostile state. General Crack filed formal complaints, but they went nowhere. Nathan Brooks, the human janitor, had more authority over one of the galaxy's most significant sites than most military leaders, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The incident established Nathan's reputation as someone who couldn't be intimidated or swayed by rank or status. He treated everyone the same, whether they were famous researchers or first-time visitors, powerful politicians or curious students. If they showed respect, he welcomed them. If they didn't, he showed them the door. Often with the tower's psychic assistants, Nathan trained a small staff of assistants, carefully selected individuals who understood that they were maintaining a memorial, not exploiting a resource. The first was Minda, the Talvorian assistant to Counselor Varick. She had been on the initial response team and had never forgotten the experience of standing inside the spire unshielded and alive. "I want to learn," she said when she approached Nathan about working at the tower. "I want to understand what you understand." Nathan studied her with his usual directness. "It's not glamorous work, Minda. Most days it's just maintenance and cleaning. I spend more time fixing broken environmental systems than I do exploring ancient mysteries. I understand. I still want to help. All right, but you need to know the tower will test you. It tested me, and it'll test everyone who wants to work here. Long term, can you handle that?" Minda's compound eyes gleamed with determination. "I can handle it." She lasted 3 days before the tower's psychic pressure drove her out screaming. Nathan found her curled up in the entrance hall, all 4 arms wrapped around herself. Trembling, he sat down beside her and offered her water. "What did you see?" he asked gently. "Everything I've ever feared," Minda whispered. "Every mistake I've made, every person I've hurt, every failing I've tried to hide. It showed me myself, and I couldn't bear it." Nathan nodded. "Yeah, it does that. The Voidorn built this place to test worthiness, and their idea of a test was to confront you with your own darkness. It's not trying to be cruel. It's trying to see if you can face yourself honestly." I can't go back in there." "That's okay. Not everyone can. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." "Well, Tivorian, but you know what I mean." Mind looked at him with wonder. "How do you do it? How do you face that every day?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I guess I've spent enough time alone with my thoughts that the tower doesn't show me anything I haven't already faced. I know I'm flawed. I've made mistakes. I don't hide from that, and maybe that's why the tower accepts me. I'm not trying to be something I'm not." Minda left the spire that day and didn't return for 6 months. When she came back, she was different. Quieter, more centered. She walked up to Nathan and said simply, "I'm ready to try again." This time she lasted a week before the pressure became too much, but it was progress. Over the following year, Minda gradually built up her tolerance, learning to coexist with the tower's judgment the way Nathan did. She never became as comfortable with it as Nathan was, but she became competent enough to assist with daily operations. Others followed. A young Calderian named Tresh, who had studied Voidborn history and wanted to help preserve their legacy. A human woman named Sarah Morgan, who had worked as an archaeologist and saw the spire as the discovery of a lifetime. A philosophical Rillian named Sun, who believed the Tower's psychic challenges could help beings achieve enlightenment. Each of them went through the tower's testing. Some failed and left, others persevered and joined Nathan's small team. Together, they created a community. Within the Obsidian Spire, a group dedicated to maintenance, preservation, and understanding. Nathan taught them everything he'd learned: how to read the tower's moods, how to navigate its psychic currents without protective shielding, how to repair systems that use technology nobody fully understood, how to show respect to the billions of preserved consciousnesses in the repository, how to clean void-born crystal matrices without damaging the delicate psychic imprints. But more than technical skills, Nathan taught them philosophy. He taught them that caring for something wasn't about ownership or control, it was about service. It was about recognizing that some things were bigger than yourself and choosing to help them anyway. It was about finding meaning in humble work and taking pride in doing that work well. A lot of people think janitors are at the bottom of the ladder, Nathan said during one training session. They think it's a job you do when you can't do anything better, but I think they're wrong. Janitors are the people who keep everything functioning. We're the ones who notice when things break before anyone else does. We maintain the foundation that lets everyone else do their important work. There's honor in that. His assistants, drawn from species across the galaxy, listened and learned. They came to understand why the Obsidian Spire had accepted this unremarkable human when it had rejected everyone else. Nathan didn't see the tower as a trophy to be claimed or a resource to be exploited. He saw it as a responsibility to be honored, and he approached that responsibility with genuine humility and care. But Nathan remained the heart of it all. He was the one the tower trusted most, the one who could venture into its deepest levels and its most dangerous archives. He was the translator between a structure that thought in psychic wavelengths and people who thought in words. The most profound moment came during Nathan's second year at the Spire. He had been working in the central repository, the crystalline chamber that housed the preserved consciousness of the Voidorn people. The repository had a way of sharing memories, allowing those who were sensitive enough to experience fragments of Voidborn lives. Nathan had experienced hundreds of these memories. By now, he'd seen Voidborn children playing in gardens that no longer existed. He'd felt the love between bonded pairs. He'd witnessed the slow corruption of their society as they became obsessed with psychic power, turning their gifts into weapons, their culture into a military machine. But on this particular day, the repository shared something different. It showed Nathan the end. He found himself experiencing the final hours of a void born named Sarah, a builder who had helped construct the Obsidian Spire. Sarah had known what was coming. The psychic weapons had become too powerful, too unstable. The feedback loops were cascading out of control. The entire civilization was tearing itself apart, mind by mind, soul by soul. In those final hours, Sarah and others like him had made a choice. They could have fled. They could have tried to save themselves. Instead, they stayed. They poured every ounce of their remaining strength into completing the repository, into preserving not the weapons or the power, but the memories, the truth of what they had been before they lost themselves. Nathan felt Saratha's despair as the psychic maelstrom consumed his people. He felt the determination to create something meaningful from the ashes, and in the final moment before Sarah's consciousness joined the billions. Already in the repository, Nathan felt something else, hope, a desperate, fragile hope that someday someone would come, someone would understand, someone would care. When Nathan emerged from the memory, he was crying. He placed his hand on the crystalline matrix and spoke to the presence within. I understand. Now, you weren't waiting for a warrior or a psychic master. You were waiting for someone who would care about your story, about what you were, not just what you became. That's what I'm here to do, I promise. The repository pulsed with an emotion so powerful that Nathan staggered. It was gratitude so profound. It felt like physical weight. For 3,000 years, the void had waited in their crystalline prison, hoping that their sacrifice had meant something, and finally someone had come who understood. From that day forward, Nathan's work took on new meaning. He wasn't just maintaining a building, he was honoring a promise made across millennia. Every floor he cleaned, every system he repaired, every visitor he guided was an act of remembrance. The void had destroyed themselves, yes, but they had also loved and created and hoped. They deserved to be remembered for all of it. Word of Nathan's dedication spread. People began to understand that the Obsidian Spire wasn't just a repository of ancient knowledge, it was a living memorial kept vital by the daily efforts of a human janitor who had looked at 3,000 years of accumulated fear and seen only a building that needed help. On the 5-year anniversary of his first entry into the spire, Nathan stood at the base of the tower and looked up at its vast height. He'd explored every level now, cataloged every system, mapped every psychic current. He knew this building better than anyone had ever known any structure. It wasn't just a workplace or a home, it was a partner, a friend, a responsibility he'd accepted willingly and would maintain for as long as he was able. The anniversary celebration was subdued as Nathan had requested. Just him, his small team, and counselor Varric, who had become something of a friend over the years. They gathered in Nathan's quarters with simple food and drink, sharing stories about their most memorable moments in the spire. Remember when that research team from the Peltax University tried to use a gravitic scanner on level 47, Sarah said, laughing. The tower didn't appreciate that at all. Nathan grinned. I've never seen people run so fast. Turns out the void really didn't like beings trying to see through their walls. The psychic feedback almost fried their equipment. You warned them, Tree pointed out. Young Calarian had grown from an uncertain assistant into Nathan's right hand over the past few years. They didn't listen. People rarely do at first. Nathan said they come here expecting the tower to be a passive object they can study. It takes time to understand it's more than that. Varies. His scales a contented blue, raised his glass to Nathan Brooks, who taught us all to see buildings as beings worthy of respect. They drank to that, and the conversation turned to future plans. Nathan had been working on a project for months, something he hadn't shared with anyone yet. But tonight, surrounded by people he trusted, he decided to reveal it. I've been thinking about something, Nathan said. The repository contains billions of void-born consciousnesses right there, preserved, but they're not really alive. They're more like recordings, memories, without the ability to make new ones. That's correct, Varick said. The crystalline matrix preserves the psychic imprint at the moment of death. It's an incredibly advanced form of data storage, but it's static. What if it didn't have to be? Nathan asked. What if we could find a way to let them interact with the present, not resurrect them exactly, but allow them to experience the galaxy as it is now? Through us, the room fell silent. Sarah was the first to speak. Nathan, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? A psychic interface, Nathan said, something that would allow willing participants to form a temporary connection with the repository. The Voidborn could experience the world through our senses, see what their legacy has become, and we could learn from them directly, ask questions, understand their history in ways no amount of research could achieve. Minda's forearms moved in agitation. That's incredibly dangerous. The void psychic weapons were created by beings who could merge minds. If we create an interface, we risk allowing hostile imprints to access living brains. I know the risks, Nathan said calmly, but I've been communing with the repository for 5 years. I felt the Voidborn presence. Yes, some of them were warriors and weapons designers, but most of them were ordinary people, farmers and artists and teachers. They didn't want to become weapons, they were forced into it by their society's obsession with power. Don't they deserve a chance to be remembered as more than monsters? Varick leaned forward, scales shifting through thoughtful colors. You've already tested this, haven't you? Nathan nodded. 3 months ago, I established a basic connection with a Voidborn named Caller. She was a botanist specialized in creating gardens that could grow in harsh environments. Through me, she saw the garden I built in the entrance hall, the tomatoes, the herbs, and she was happy. Varick, for the first time in 3,000 years, she experienced joy and the risks. Tresh asked, what happened to you during this connection? It was intense, Nathan admitted. Our minds touched, and for a few minutes I could feel what she felt, remember what she remembered, but she never tried to control me or harm me. She was just grateful to experience life again, even secondhand. When the connection ended, I was exhausted, but I was fine. Soon, the philosophical Rillian spoke in his slow, measured way. This could change everything. If we could communicate directly with the Voidborn, we could finally understand the full scope of their civilization, the mistakes they made, yes, but also the beauty they created, the knowledge they accumulated. It would be the greatest archaeological breakthrough in galactic history, or the greatest disaster, Minda countered. If even one hostile consciousness manages to hijack a living mind, then we establish protocols. Nathan interrupted. We screen participants carefully. We start with short supervised connections. We monitor everything and shut down at the first sign of danger, but we try, because these beings deserve better than to be locked away forever, remembered only as cautionary tales. The debate continued for hours. By the end of it, they had agreed to submit a proposal to the Preservation Council for what Nathan called the Voidborn Interface Project. It would require extensive safety reviews, technological development, and ethical oversight, but if it succeeded, it would transform the Obsidian Spire from a memorial to the dead into a bridge between past and present. The project took 2 years to approve and another year to implement. The interface chamber was built on level 70, halfway between the living quarters and the central Repository. It was a circular room with comfortable seating and advanced monitoring equipment. The interface itself was a smaller version of the repository's crystalline matrix, carefully attuned to allow controlled psychic connections. The first official test involved Nathan and a volunteer voidborn consciousness named Trick, a historian who had documented his civilization's decline. Nathan sat in the interface chair while Sarah and Minda monitored his vital signs and psychic activity. Varric watched from the observation window, scales shifting nervously. Nathan closed his eyes and opened mind. The connection formed gradually, a gentle merging of consciousness. He felt Trick's presence, ancient and weary, tentatively reaching out. Hello, Nathan. Thought, I'm Nathan Brooks, thank you for agreeing to this. The response came, not in words but in emotions and concepts: curiosity, caution, hope, and then gradually TK began to share memories. Nathan saw the void-born civilization at its height, a culture of incredible beauty and achievement. He saw the first experiments with psychic weaponization, the voices that warned against it, the voices that were ignored. He saw the slow corruption, the descent into madness, and finally the desperate creation of the obsidian spire as a last testament to what they had been. Through Nathan's eyes, Trick saw the galaxy as it was now, the diverse species that inhabited it, the peace that had been built after countless wars, the researchers who came to the spire not to steal its secrets but to learn from its warnings. And he saw Nathan himself, the human janitor who had chosen to care for the last remnant of a dead civilization. When the connection ended after 20 minutes, Nathan opened his eyes to find tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling. It worked, he said. Horrorously, Trick saw everything. He understands what we've built here, and he's grateful. The interface project became the crown jewel of the Obsidian Spire's activities. Carefully selected participants formed temporary connections with voidborn consciousnesses, creating a dialogue across millennia. Artists connected with voidborn artists and emerged with inspiration for works that blended ancient and modern aesthetics. Scientists discussed theory with voidborn researchers, advancing understanding of psychic phenomena. Philosophers debated ethics with voidborn thinkers who had lived through the consequences of their civilizations' choices. Each connection was monitored, limited and respectful, and each one reinforced the same truth: the void had been people, flawed people who had made terrible mistakes, but people nonetheless. They had loved and dreamed and created. They had feared and failed, and in their final act they had chosen to preserve truth over propaganda, warning over propaganda, hope over despair. Nathan continued his daily work of maintaining the spire, but he also spent hours in the interface chamber, forming connections with different void-born consciousnesses. He learned their language, their culture, their history in ways no academic study could achieve. He became not just the tower's custodian, but its voice, sharing void-born perspectives with the living galaxy. One day, while connecting with a void-born engineer named Vasic, Nathan experienced something unexpected. Vasic shared a memory of the tower's original purpose, something that hadn't been in any of the historical records. The Obsidian Spire wasn't just a memorial. It was a seed. The void in their final days had built the repository not just to preserve their consciousnesses, but to help a future species avoid their fate. The psychic defenses weren't meant to kill, they were meant to select only of being capable of approaching the tower with genuine compassion and humility, only someone who could see value in service rather than conquest, only someone who could face the Voidborn's darkness without being consumed by it would be able to enter and access the repository. That person the Voidborn had hoped would become a teacher, someone who could take their hard-won wisdom and share it with the living galaxy, someone who could honor their memory while helping others avoid their mistakes. You are meant to be here, Vazek communicated through the interface. For 3,000 years we waited for someone like you. We never knew what species they would come from or what form they would take, but we knew they would come, and you did. Nathan sat with that revelation for a long time after the connection ended. The Voidborn hadn't just accepted him as the tower's custodian, they had been waiting for him or someone like him since the moment they built the spire. Every janitor who had ever taken pride in their work, every humble person who had chosen service over glory, every being who had looked at something broken and decided to fix it, any of them could have been the one. It just happened to be Nathan. So what do I do now? Nathan asked the empty interface chamber. I'm already maintaining the tower and running the interface project. What else do you need from me? The tower itself responded, its psychic presence gentle and warm. Images flooded Nathan's mind. Children walking through the halls, learning directly from Voidborn consciousnesses, schools being built around the spire dedicated to teaching the next generation about the dangers of weaponizing consciousness and the importance of ethical development. The Obsidian Spire becoming not a feared monument but a living center of learning, a place where past and future could meet and grow together. Nathan smiled. An educational center. You want to become a school? The tower pulsed with affirmation. All right then, let's make it happen. A group of new researchers was arriving, young and eager and a little frightened. Nathan smiled and went to meet them, ready to give the same orientation he'd given dozens of times before. Be respectful. Be humble. Listen more than you take. Remember that you're a guest in a memorial to billions of lives. As he walked, the Obsidian Spire hummed contentedly around him. It had been alone for 3,000 years, slowly dying, its purpose forgotten and its warnings unheeded. Then a human janitor had walked through its doors with a mop and a willingness to help, and everything had changed. Nobody could enter the cursed tower, they had said, but the human janitor was already living there, and he had no intention of leaving. He had a job to do. After all, buildings needed maintenance, even cursed ones, especially cursed ones. And in the end, that simple truth had saved not just the Obsidian Spire but the legacy of an entire civilization. Sometimes the galaxy didn't need warriors or geniuses or heroes. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to clean the floors and fix what was broken, one small repair at a time. Nathan Brooks was that person, and the Obsidian Spire was grateful. The tower pulsed with contentment, its psychic field wrapping around Nathan like a warm blanket. In the depths of the crystalline repository, billions of preserved consciousnesses rested easier, knowing their stories would be told, their mistakes would be learned from, and their home would be cared for by someone who genuinely loved it. In the grand scheme of galactic history, Nathan Brooks was just a janitor. But to the Obsidian Spire and the legacy of the Voidorn, he was everything. He was the caretaker who had come when everyone else had given up. He was the human who had looked at something everyone else feared and seen something worth saving. And that made all the difference. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments. Whether positive or negative, your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug and see you in the next